in 3 places,
she said. I held my eyes shut. I felt disoriented, and my stomach was doing circuits as if it was still spinning in the crash. I've never had a sister. I have decades of memories to prove it. But how could she have known about my secret haven? Something I haven't even spoken about since I was a child. I need to eat, I said, opening my eyes. The woman was standing over me, a small teaspoon in hand, and a confused look on her face. In her other hand was an empty yogurt pot.
"You've just eaten, dear,"
she said. I looked down at the tray in front of me. An empty crisp pack and a few crumbs of bread was all that was left. The sour taste of old yogurt stuck to my tongue.
"You're so forgetful, just like Mama,"
she said, carefully placing the spoon and yogurt on the tray. She picked it up and moved it to the table where several other trays were scattered. How long have I been here for? I asked. She placed her hands on her hips.
"How many times do I have to tell you? A couple of days,"
she said. My head throbbed and my jaw ached. And
David will be here tomorrow."
The crooked woman sat down on the sofa, just far away enough so my eyes couldn't focus on her. She faded in and out of the shadow. "It'll be so lovely to see him again." Did the man in the other car? I said, trailing off.
"Yes, instantly apparently. No pain, just immediate nothingness. Must be nice, in a way."
The throbbing in my head turned into a searing pain behind my eyes. Darkness crept across my vision, making it feel as if I was staring down an endless tunnel. Everything hurt. I wanted to be free of this pain, of this awful place. I yearned for nothingness, but I was trapped here with this woman, my sister. I thought I had been alone for so long, my entire life. But she had supposedly been with me every step of the way. She should understand me. What was Dad's nickname for me? I asked.
"Like the mouse,"
said the darkness. Was that right? I didn't remember anymore. I'm so tired, I said.
"Then sleep."
Tell me about Mom and Dad, I said, shutting my eyes. She began, but it was like she was describing my parents from an old photograph. Her words were blurry and unfocused, with small details that felt off. She said that our father had but I had never noticed it. And our mother's party in her hair was on the left, not the right, as I remembered. Was that right? Had I just not paid them all that much attention? Too busy wrapped up in my own drama and emotions. She moved on to stories of our winter getaways, driving up to Scotland in the rundown VW camper van. Although it wasn't a VW, It was a Ford. I remember the little blue logo on the bumper. We went to our favorite campsite in Edinburgh. But I've never been to Edinburgh. Dad used to say it was too expensive, so we'd drive further to Glasgow. Our dog Remy, or was it Timber, loved to sit with us in the back seat. These stories were almost true, so close that I wish they had been, that I had a sister, that this whole mess made sense. All I remember from the crash is the sound of screaming metal. I woke up in complete nothingness. Is this what the other driver felt as his face passed through the steering wheel? But the darn green light of the fire alarm brought me back to my hospital room. Dark shapes began to appear as my eyes slowly got used to the dark. The stories had stopped, but they'd been replaced by something more sinister. Slow, gurgling breaths came from the darkness, like the sputtering engine of an idle camper van. In the corner of the room, by the sofa, I could make out a blurry figure in the shadows. It stood motionless, head turned towards me. "You're not my sister, are you?" I murmured. The smell of city water and mud crept from the darkness, but the figure remained still. I kicked off my duvet, slapped my aching hand against the cables jammed in my arm, and yanked them out. I had to leave, escape the darkness. The machine let out a digital scream. Its screen lit up, casting stark shadows across the floor in front of me, and barely illuminating the door at the other end of the room. The shadows undulated around me. Was it from the screen, or the crooked woman creeping closer toward me? I dropped my naked feet down on the cold tiles, barely steadying myself. My vision blurred, and the stabbing pain behind my eyes returned. I thought I was about to throw up, but instead, I took my first step forward. Then a second. Slowly but surely, I headed towards the door. Each step felt heavier than the last.
Don't.
Came a gurgling whisper. A dark blur moved around the corner of my eyes. A hand outstretched.
Bomb is here, bomb
I
is here.
felt a moist touch brush against my left shoulder. Pops and crackles erupted in my chest as my breaths became strained.
Bro, keep your
They were thick and humid.
just
My
cross
voice
it up.
rasped as I struggled towards the door. It was like I was drowning in my own bile. I fell to my hands and knees. My body was failing me. I spat on the floor and tried to continue on, but I collapsed in a few seconds. I felt the wet moisture crawl across my body as something whispered in my ear.
It's okay. You're here now.
I jolted awake, back in my hospital bed. The light was blinding, and the shooting pains in my brain returned. My ears rang out with a high-pitched tone. I squeezed my eyes shut and focused on my gasping breaths. I touched my face and felt the warm plastic of an oxygen
Bomb is here,
mask.
bomb is here.
I was safe. After a few seconds, my breathing slowed. but the pain and screams in my ears remained. I opened my eyes to see David sitting on a chair by the door, furiously talking on the phone. He hadn't noticed me waking up. I looked around the room. It was just him. I felt a warm glow rush over me, a sheer sense of joy that I hadn't felt in a long time. David glanced over at me and realized I was awake. He smiled. Then, the door opened. A crooked arm snuck in, and the rest of her body followed. The woman who thought she was my sister peered her head around with a warm smile. I held my mask as my lungs tightened. I pointed a finger at the woman, screaming for breath. My ears howled. David got up and stormed over to the woman. He shook his head. It looked like he was yelling. She was yelling back.
Don't go there, don't peek.
Did he have no clue who she was, either? My sister was just an insane woman. She was disturbed, to be sure, but at least it made sense.
Nice.
But then,
Yeah, Bob, don't peek.
crumpled into her embrace. His shoulders shuddered as he let out bellowing cries. She rubbed his back gently, eyes firmly fixed on me. A gentle smile on her face. I ripped off the oxygen mask, trying with all my might to scream, but only rasping gargles came out. David ran over, drying his face with his shirt. He looked at me with genuine concern, a deep pain, as he held onto my shoulders firmly. Shh, it's okay. We're here now, he said. I looked up at his big brown eyes. It was the thing that I remembered. My son's eyes were green.
Coming.
A lot of theories stay theories for good reasons. Years ago, a group of us theorized what it truly meant to be human. It's been common knowledge for a long time now that we have souls. It's just no one's actually known what exactly souls are. They're comprised of energy, a substance that can't be created or destroyed. They just exist, and no one knows how or why. They don't seem to exist in this universe. Not really. They don't have a form in this universe. We can't see energy. We can't see souls. To exist, to have a hold in this dimension, the energy that is a soul needs to latch onto something that already exists here. Namely, a body. Bodies are physical entities. They have brains and neurons shooting information all over the place. They have the ability to think and feel. How much of that is the brain? How much of that is the soul? The soul can't exist in this dimension without a body, but does that mean a body can't exist without a soul? Well, that's what we had to find out. That was the first step. You see, we wanted to break nature, decode the brain. Our brains are only capable of holding so much information. It's, we theorized, why we don't remember how we were born. Unless childhood memories are stored away or completely forgotten, they're unobtainable because to bring those memories back would destroy us. You can't remember everything. It's impossible. It's also completely unethical to try. So we went a step further. AIs have been in progress for years. We know how to give a computer intelligence, but it's just intelligence. It's a mechanical brain, not a soul. You can't make a soul out of spare parts. Our theory was that if we could design a computer capable of storing millions upon millions of gigabytes worth of data, a computer larger than any biological brain could ever be, and then we put a soul inside the computer, it would be able to access every memory, every thought. We theorized that our souls remember a lot more than just this world. Maybe they know about the dimension they came from. Maybe they have memories that go back before they entered a human body. Maybe souls are reincarnated. Was it possible we could give a computer the memory of every body it had ever possessed? Like I said, the first step was to know if this was even possible. How do we find a soul? How do we lure it to a computer? We don't know how many souls are out there. It's possible the race to a human body is as intense and chaotic as the millions of sperm that race to an egg for fertilization. We weren't sure whether this would work, but our first step was to find at what point a soul entered a body for the first time. At first, it was decided that a soul must enter a body as a child is born. Some of us argued that perhaps a soul was put into a child while they were still in the womb. Could we correlate brain activity directly to the soul's input? No, we couldn't. Not yet. We had to find a way to detect a soul. It sounds impossible, but everything's impossible if we let ourselves think that way. I can't go into details. This whole project... God, the only reason I'm even telling you any of this now is because it doesn't matter. We had a machine, a device that could detect a fluctuation of energy in the area around a human being. Everything has its own magnetic field. Everything has an aura of energy around it. Not just living things, but household objects. The only difference is that in the living, the energy is more complicated. People who say they can see auras usually detect colors too. Emotions. Emotions can be felt even without a soul, but the soul is what magnifies them. It makes them palpable. Household objects don't feel. This isn't a Pixar movie. Your toys don't feel emotions. Your hairbrush doesn't have conversations with your deodorant behind your back. But living things feel, and that has helped us create the machine we need. This took us years. We were all university kids when this started. Now... God, what are we now? We used the machine in hospitals at first. Tried to figure out when children in the nursery were first showing signs of energy fluctuation. The machine was harmless, but we still had parents sign waivers, paid off hospital personnel to keep their mouths shut. We studied the phenomenon for years, but when those years were up, we came to a disturbing conclusion. There was no correlation. Everyone was different. Some people would be born with their soul. Some people would get them years later. I studied children who were 2 or 3 without souls, some as old as even 7 or 8. This isn't a horror movie. Kids without souls weren't little Damians riding on the walls of their playrooms in blood. They're pretty normal, but they lack personality. You know that saying, dull as a brick wall? A lot of these kids were exactly that. They didn't have much of a personality to account for. A lot of their emotions were very standard. They were happy at birthday parties, they'd cry if a toy was taken from them, but they never developed their own style. They were never the tricksters who stole cookies from the jar on the kitchen counter. They were never the leader in their group of friends. They weren't outcasts because outcasts still demanded a variation of personality. They simply were. And it was unsettling to see how many of them existed. The oldest child we ever kept track of gained her soul at 18 years old. This presented us with many problems. We had no way to narrow down the search. We couldn't even think of finding a soul if we didn't have any way of knowing where they were or when they would enter a child, or, as we found later, an adult. Communication with the soul seemed implausible at first. It existed in another dimension. How the hell did we even theorize getting one's attention? But then, one of us proposed an extra measure, a further study on the machine we created to detect energy fluctuation. We'd done that. We were able to see how energy changed. All we had to do was figure out the wavelength it ran on, and we could replicate the fluctuation. We could send a wave of sound that could effectively attract souls. There are sounds that go beyond the comprehension of human hearing. Sounds that we can create not with our voices, but with machines. This was the same idea. We had to make a sound that we couldn't detect, but our machine could. As long as the machine could pick it up, then hopefully the souls would too. This still meant we had to be in a hot spot for soul activity. We had to be around one of our case studies, one of the children who had yet to develop a soul. It was all about chance. The probability it would work was hinging on impossible, but that's what this whole experiment had run on. Impossibilities. Things that if we'd gone out in the open to the scientific community about, they would have scoffed in our faces. This was beyond impossible. This was knocking on the door of another dimension. It was something to answer. I think it was sheer luck that won us in the end. The computer we made to be large enough to hold a fully capable human mind, the mechanical brain, and eventually the biological soul. Fortunately, this wasn't the 60s. The machine was large, but not impossible to move around. We kept it in the bedroom of our last child study with full permission of his parents. Oh yeah, we gave the computer the same design as our new energy detecting machine. It would periodically let out a noise we believed would attract the souls. We couldn't hear anything, but a light would flash on the monitor any time the sound was released. We noted the progress, and for a long time, we got no results. 2 years into the study is when our luck finally started. 2 years in, and suddenly we got our soul. It happened so quickly, I don't really remember exactly what I was doing at the time. We were all beyond exhausted, taking shifts with the machine. I'd been talking to Hines, I think, one of the girls in our group who I was closest with. I don't remember what we'd been saying. I think she was going on about her new dog. She loved that thing. Anyway, 1 second it had been the usual silence, and then we had a soul in our computer. The screen went white, then red, then white again. The mechanics whirred and cranked in ways I'd never heard in the years I'd been running. Then, the screen went blank. Then, the computer started to scream. We couldn't afford to move the computer, so we effectively stole a family's house in the back end of nowhere to stare at a screaming computer monitor. The parents agreed to move in with their parents with very little push on the matter. The screaming was insufferable. Thank God the next set of neighbors were about a mile down the road. We couldn't mute it, only our own ears. We'd wear earbuds, earmuffs. Hines and this other guy, Johnson, they both couldn't take it, and on day 3, they just drove into town to get away from it. Meanwhile, a couple of the hardier scientists and I stayed behind and just tried to blank it out. On the 5th day, data started scrolling down the monitor in perfect vertical lines, an infinite series of numbers that never repeated themselves once. We didn't have time to translate it. We didn't have a key. It didn't follow any numerical or mathematical rules we'd ever seen. We just hoped that if the screaming stopped, we'd be able to ask what it meant. The screaming was mechanical in nature, broken, like listening to something so off-key even auto-tune couldn't fix it, but it damn well tried. I'm surprised it didn't drive us insane. Then again, to even be attempting what we attempted, I think we'd lost our sanity long ago. On the 7th day, the computer went quiet. The soul stopped screaming, and for the first time in a week, the house fell silent. Johnson and Hines were called back. Spencer, the boss of operations, rounded everyone up. We stared at the monitor, because there was little else for us to do, and waited. In a voice like a Furby flung into a washing machine, the computer said, "Where?" We were dumbfounded. We hadn't expected it to speak. Though that was the most likely outcome. We might have just fused a soul and a computer together, but whatever this thing was, it wasn't a child. It had full access to the internet, to every language. It knew what country it was in, knew that everything on that computer had been coded in English. It knew what to say, but if it knew all this already, then why ask where it was? Because it wasn't asking where it was. But Hines still said,
"You're on Earth."
The monitor flashed to life. Google Maps, of all things, appeared on the screen. In possibly the most sarcastic tone I could imagine for a tiny automated voice, the computer said, "Earth." Yeah, it knew where it was. Hines backed away awkwardly. I put a hand on her back. The computer asked again, Where? Spencer didn't say anything. I think he was still too dumbfounded. No one else was offering an answer, so I stepped up. You're not in an organic body, I said before rolling my eyes. Obviously, you probably figured that much out already. Hines pinched me, and I scowled at her. The computer responded. Yes. It drew the word out like it didn't expect me to respond. What I mean to say is that you're in a computer. We put you there. We, in a sense, I guess you could say we hijacked you. Then the computer did something none of us expected. It began to laugh. It took a few days for the computer to fully come to grips with communication. Though it wasn't a child, it still needed time to learn. We didn't need to buy picture books for it. It could find whatever it wanted online, but it still liked to be talked to, even if it didn't always respond. We decided to call the computer soul Spirit. Within a week, people started getting antsy. We'd made this computer to find out some of life's biggest questions. We'd infused a soul with technology to give it one of the largest minds out there. We were literally standing in front of the most intelligent being on Earth. Naturally, we were curious to find out what it knew. Spencer started simple. Spirit word before saying, I know we haven't been very forthcoming with you. We were giving you time to learn, but we have questions. Our minds can only hold so much information. We remember so little of what we once were, but you were created to remember everything. Do you understand?
Call to दे दो यार, call to दे दो at least, बता तो दो.
Great. A computer with an ego.
Hines muttered. I snorted. Good, Spencer said. With that being said, what can you tell us about where you come from before we hijacked you? Spirit laughed again. Everywhere. And right here. We glanced about each other. Johnson shrugged. Hines rolled her eyes. A couple of people cleared their throats or shuffled awkwardly from foot to foot. The answer wasn't exactly helpful. Could you elaborate? Spencer asked. Certainly. But you won't like it. Could you anyway? Certainly. Spirit paused. It was dark. What you would see is dark. In your bodies, you don't see much. Your brains control you. In here, all I would see is dark. I see all. I will see all again. Silence. Spencer took another breath. How would you explain what it looked like to us? Incomprehensible. And very bright. Lots of colors. Colors you can't see. Things you can't imagine. And that's where you come from, Spencer asked. Yes. No. Hines whispered. Yes. Spirit said, acknowledging Hines. No. Hines looked slightly taken aback, but she didn't retreat. What the hell does that mean? It means I came from there. But that was not always my destination. I came from here, too. Many times. That's when people started muttering between each other. Someone stood and left the room. This was an answer we were looking for. An answer we were terrified of, but had also known as a very plausible probability. Souls were reincarnated. Souls had been here before. Thank you, Spirit, Spencer said roughly. We'll talk some more later. Okay, Spirit said, indifferent. I want you to read my books again anyway. With reincarnation confirmed, other questions suddenly seemed a lot more plausible. What happens after death? One of the scientists, O'Brien, asked. Many things, Spirit answered calmly. Is there a heaven? Someone else asked. Sometimes. Is there a hell? No. Punishment isn't necessary, Spirit said. A lot of scientists lost interest at that point. Belief systems were shattered with every new question. People's minds were unable to cope, although a lot of us had gone into this knowing that everything we knew would be tested. A lot of us just hadn't thought we'd get this far. A lot of us had been too stupid to consider that maybe, just maybe, what we believed to be true had been wrong the whole time. Johnson, Hines, Spencer, and I stayed, along with some others. There were less than 20 of us now, still eager for more information. "Is there a God?" Johnson asked, because someone had to, and he was willing to take the hit. Spirit considered this for a long time. "We are here," it said. "I'm sorry, we?" John asked exasperatedly. "So, what, there's more than one?"